and welcome. My name is Tiffany Smith, and we're sitting here with Mr. Michael Marsh today, who's running for Congress, and so we just have a couple of questions here for him. So, Michael, tell me a little bit about your thoughts on everything that's going on with immigration. What do you think about immigration reform?
Well, it depends on what they do, who's defining the word reform. It's definitely a problem. You know, the border needs to be closed down. The security system, including the wall and the, there's high-tech equipment that can be used, and plus people on the border. You know, that needs to be there, and that has to happen before they can talk about Dreamers or anybody else. You know.
So it sounds like you're very supportive of the wall, then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So right now we're seeing a huge crisis with a number of people who are being detained at the border. Obviously, Donald Trump just signed that executive order to restrict children from being torn away from their parents. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Well, first off, there are a couple thousand kids that were taken from adults who may or may not have been the parents. Mm-hmm. And then there's 11,000 that were unaccompanied. You know, they were just going on their own. And they obviously concentrate on the 2,000 that were taken from adults. But not all of those adults are parents. There's a large-scale child trafficking ring going on. You know, it's not just drugs that are being smuggled across the country, into the country. It's also human. Yeah, and some of them, they're going to get honest jobs, but some of them are the traffickers are planning to turn them into sex slaves or slave laborers. And so there needs to be to know who these kids are and who the adults are. Make sure they are actually family. And like if you go into Canada and you have a minor with you, Canada's going to ask, you know, is this minor related to you? Yeah. So why can't the United States do the same thing? They should. Then, you know, part of the problem, and Trump did sign that executive order, but back in the 90s, Bill Clinton, there was a law, you know, they were supposed to be detained, you know. Now, Obama and to a certain extent, George W. as well, they had pretty much a catch and release policy. But they detained some. Mm-hmm. And then you also have a later court case, Flores versus somebody. And that court case said you can only hold a child for 20 days in custody. You know, but it takes longer than 20 days to process the adults.
Right.
So, you know, there's going to be a problem there. And part of the executive order was that Jeff Sessions is supposed to go to the court and try to modify that agreement. We'll see how that works out.
So in your opinion then, for the sake of the children, forget everything else, but for the sake of the children, do you think it's better or worse for them to be separated?
Depends on who they're with.
Depends on who they're with. I would absolutely agree with that. How would you tell the difference then? How would you, what kind of policy would you implement to tell the difference between people who are coming in here honestly or people who are coming in here with criminal intent?
Yeah, that part of it would have to be instinct, but you know, the adults, the children that are depending on how old they are. You know, if they're old enough to ask, you know, take them away from the adults for a few minutes and ask them who they're with.
Okay.
And if they're with their mother or father, you know, and let them stay together. And if they're with a trafficker, you know, put them someplace safe.
Okay. So I do know, specifically with DACA, for example, these children were brought over. Obviously, they were minors. The parents, I don't really see that there's much question as to whether or not the parents broke the law coming in. The children, however, did not exactly break the law. It wasn't their choice. They came in with their parents. And now that they're here, they actually don't have a way of getting a permanent status because they were brought here illegally. And in order to file for citizenship, you have to have a permanent status. So DACA actually made it harder for individuals to actually file for citizenship. What would you do about that situation?
Well, I'm not really sure that citizenship is the answer. You know, I see their rallies, you know, it's usually the Mexican flag they're flying, even though they don't know what Mexico goes about. And they don't really understand why their parents left. Yeah. But definitely something has to be done. But if I'm in Congress, a bill that I would be willing to support would be, if they've stayed out of trouble, you know, like got a job, or I'm not sure, you know, a lot of people say going to college, but I'm not really sure that's a good idea for anybody right now.
Okay.
But, you know, if they're being productive citizens, and they're good citizens, then I would take into account the fact that they didn't come here on their own volition. It wasn't their idea. And I would be willing to give them legal status.
Okay.
I'm not so sure about citizenship, but...
So maybe permanent legal status that would allow them then to file for citizenship.
Yeah. Down the road.
Once they go through the classes and the steps and things like that.
Yeah. And once they make that decision that they actually want to, you know, they'd be able to file. But for right now, the only thing I'd be willing to give them is legal status.
Okay.
I'm not... and one of the reasons I'm hesitant about the legal status is, I mean, the citizenship is, citizens can vote. And from what I'm seeing of them, I don't think they really, a lot of them don't have America's best interests at heart.
So President Obama, former President Obama, went on at least one video, I've only seen one, where he explicitly explained that there's no way for the government or Trump or anyone like that to stop people who are not citizens from voting, especially when you have situations like California where they automatically register anyone with a license to vote. Okay.
California, Oregon has that law too.
So what would you do in that situation? Obviously that'd be extremely difficult, but being a citizen here it's a social contract. So you have to come in with a certain understanding that you have to accept America, and America has to also accept you. You can't just come in with the right and the ability to change the government. So with all kinds of voter fraud, and then also citizens and non-citizens able to vote, what would you do to change that situation?
Well, what they did here in Oregon, and I'm not really sure because Kate Brown is our governor. We have a Democrat governor, and she may not be enforcing it. But the people of Oregon voted that, because the legislature gave undocumented aliens the right to get wasn't a driver's license, but it was a permit,
Mhm.
yeah, which would be, have the same effect.
Right.
Yeah. And the voters said no. Yeah, they overturned it. But they haven't overturned it in California.
Right.
And I'm not really sure under Kate Brown if it's being enforced here. So the main thing we need to do is get people into office that will enforce our laws.
Okay.
I mean, they're enforced against Americans. Why shouldn't they be enforced against undocumented aliens?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's probably the main thing. And speaking of Obama, like he put children in cages, and Trump gets demonized for it. But George Washington warned the American people about parties. He was against parties.
Mm-hmm.
He said a spirit takes over the parties, and they will demonize the opponent, the opposing party, while glorifying their own party. And I'm paraphrasing. And they'll overlook things that their own party does and exaggerate the other parties.
And we see that a lot today.
A whole lot today. Like I mentioned, Trump is obeying the law, and those pictures, a lot of them were from the Obama administration, but nobody complained. No Democrats said it was wrong for kids to be put into these cages when Obama was doing it.
Well, part of that is because you have people like Nancy Pelosi who made full speeches, not just comments, but full speeches on the fact that we don't need to criticize immigration or the way things are run on the border, because at the time they had a Democratic president who was enforcing some of those laws. And we can still see those videos around today. There's one I just saw actually yesterday. It's still floating around, right? So in terms of the hypocrisy there, what would you do to kind of help people understand what's really going on and really bring out the facts about 1996 and Bill Clinton signing that law?
Well, and again, Bill Clinton isn't being demonized for getting the law passed.
Right.
Trump is getting demonized for enforcing it.
Right.
Again, the spirit of the party. And that needs to be broke up, the monopoly. Right now, the Democrat-Republican Party, they've got a monopoly. In my view, I would say the Democrats are evil and the Republicans are incompetent.
I think they're playing the same game, just two different sides of the coin.
Yeah, exactly right. And when George Bush did something, it was wrong. When Obama did the same thing, continue on with the same policy, it was okay. And then when Trump comes along, does the same thing, it's back to being evil. Right. Yeah. So partisan games have a lot to do with why we're in the mess we're in.
Yep. So with the executive order that Trump just signed just a couple of days ago, would you agree with that executive order, or would you see it as him caving?
It was an obvious cave, but I'm not really sure he really had much choice. Because, the American people weren't being given an honest assessment of what was going on. You're tearing children from their mothers. Okay, these same people, they don't mind when the state takes children from parents, you know, for, quote, Child Protection Act or something. Yeah, which happens probably a lot more than what's going on the border. But, you know, the optics of it was bad. And so I'm not really sure he had much choice.
Okay. What part of it, if any, did you agree with, and what part did you disagree with?
Well, first we're going to have to figure out which children are actually with their parents and not with a human trafficker. And that was one of the goals all along. And that still has to be a goal. And but in order for it to work, and I don't mind, you know, in fact, I think the children should stay with the parents, if they're the real parents. And that way they can all be shipped back together.
Okay.
It's a lot easier, a lot more convenient. But one thing that's not being talked about that much is it all hinges on a federal judge from the Flores case. I think it's a California district judge. But she ruled that they could only be held for 20 days. And see if she's willing to modify that. Because that's what caused the problem to begin with, is that 20-day limit that the government had.
Right.
Because without that, you know, they wouldn't have had to separate them to begin with.
What would your ideal policy be to allow people who haven't been in the United States, who hasn't crossed the border yet illegally, what would your ideal policy be to grant them permanent residency and eventually citizenship in terms of a refugee situation?
I think we need a better definition, and this is something I really can't stress enough. The government puts out these words, but they don't really do a good job of defining what they mean.
The law does define it quite well, but it's taken out of context so often. So the law that Bill Clinton signed actually says, if you're fearing for your life, now I'm not quoting this here, okay? If you're fearing for your life due to racial, religious, or sexist discrimination, it's specifically talking about a fear for your life, not necessarily domestic abuse or anything like that, unless it escalates to a fear for your life. And then even then, domestic abuse doesn't necessarily fall under that definition. Now we have a lot of people who are coming across the border for domestic abuse, which obviously no one should have to go through. I don't care who you are, I don't care where you're from. Okay, there are actual situations where people do need to be here, but it doesn't fall within that law. So would you adjust the definition of refugee, or would you keep it the same? Because under that definition, it takes anywhere from 6 to 24 months for all of the paperwork to process, and then for them to be placed preferably near family. Obviously, that would bypass the border, but would you keep it the same, or would you make it more encompassing definition?
Okay, the problem is, okay, there, you know, like in Central America, where most of them are coming from right now, there is a lot of crime.
Yes.
There is a lot of violence. Okay, is that enough? Because, I mean, a lot of people can say legitimately they have a fear for their life because of the circumstances down there. But if we're going to take in, you know, all these people, you know, because they have a lousy government, most of the world has a lousy government, and we can't take everyone in the world.
Right, absolutely. And the law does specifically say that it's governmental discrimination. So we have a crisis here where obviously there are people that need to have something better, but we can't necessarily provide that to everyone. We also have a crisis of people who, though in their personal lives they need something better, but it doesn't fall under that definition. So,
And most of them are coming here for a better life.
absolutely.
And, you know, America is called the land of opportunity. And comparatively speaking, it is. But the purpose of a government is to take care of its own people first. You know, once we're taken care of, then they can start worrying about these other people. And, you know, I have no problem with helping others, but, you know, if I need help, I want it to be there.
Right, right.
And right now, we have, you know, and it's not just something new, you know, I mean, it's been going on a long time, that the government cared more about people from other countries than they did the American people.
Right.
Which is why Trump won in the first place. You know, he tapped into that. He said,
Well, we can't keep being a beacon to the world for freedom and opportunity if we're not strong ourselves. We have to secure those rights and those freedoms before we can give that to everyone else as well. So today's DACA recipient, okay, do you think that they should be able to stay here in the United States, or would you send them home to get in file for a refugee program as opposed to seeking asylum here?
people that are already in that.
People who are already, for example, I have a very dear friend of mine who, she came over, she was brought over when she was 2.5, okay? And as it turns out, her father actually did things legally, okay? But he never said that. I don't know why. He never said that, but he never told her that he had started the paperwork for her to be here. So now she's here legally, but for her entire life she thought she wasn't, okay? If she hadn't actually had that paperwork started, she would be here illegally. But she's had 2 jobs since the day she was able to. And it's not like she was taking a job from someone else. She's starting a business, okay? She's going to school that she's paid for her whole self. So obviously, we need more people like my friend. But how would you differentiate between a DACA recipient who is willing to add to American society and a DACA recipient who is not willing to add to American society?
Well, it's pretty easy, actually.
Okay.
Your friend, she has started a business. You know, she's trying to improve her life, and hopefully in the future she'll be able to hire others, and that's a good thing. And you can look at that, and that's what we should be looking at when we consider the DACA people. But there's also DACA people that, you know, they're part of gangs.
We've heard a lot about those recently.
Yes, and there's others that have gotten pregnant and they're on welfare. So look at what the person has done once they're here. I mean, granted, they didn't have a choice to be here, but they do have at a certain point, they do have a choice in what they do.
Okay, so just to be clear then, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. So you're not against immigration. You would just, first of all, rather it be legal, and then on top of that, you want it to be also productive.
I want it to be productive, legal, and right now, I would probably be willing, recommend at least a temporary halt on all immigration unless it's true asylum seekers, you know, like, and Obama wouldn't let them in, but Christians in the Middle East are persecuted because of their religion.
And that falls under the refugee guidelines. So they're persecuted based on religion, sometimes based on gender, sometimes based on race, but more often than not, religion.
Yeah.
And sometimes even with a Muslim individual, for example, there are moderate Muslims who are also discriminated against. So would you fast track that?
It's a little more difficult with the Muslims
Okay.
because, a long time ago I did read the Quran,
Okay.
and if they're going to Friday prayers, they might not be out raping, robbing, and murdering the way ISIS did, but ISIS was following the Quran. They were doing what Muhammad told them to do, and camo. So I'm a little bit more hesitant about bringing in Muslims unless they put their lives on the line for American troops or something like that, then definitely bring them in.
Last question that I have for you, and we're running out of time here, so just very quickly, granting citizenship, or at least granting the ability to apply for citizenship for anyone who fights for our military. I know that's a thing that we've had before, but it hasn't been, they haven't been educated on that. Talk to me a little bit about that.
That I would be supportive of. That's the one thing, part of the immigration thing I would support. In fact, the United States, I don't know if they still do, but I know they used to have an agreement with the Philippines. A Philippine citizen could join the American military, and they'd serve whatever amount of time it was. And if they served honorably, then they were given...
We're eligible to sign up
Yeah,
for
they were
citizenship.
given legal status and ability to become citizens.
So anyone who is willing to fight for the freedoms of the United States then obviously should be at least as American as you and I. So
Yeah.
thank you, Michael, for speaking so in depth with me about immigration. So thank you everyone for sticking with us here. It was a very intriguing conversation, I think, and we really got to the bottom of a few details within immigration. So I appreciate that, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany.